Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Mem Beis of Masechta Shabbis, and Daf 142. When I was growing up in Teaneck, New Jersey, so I think at the Shul in Bnei Shern, every day after davening, I think they would say Tehillim chapter Kuf Mem Beis. What was it? Maskil David Biosa Bamora Tefila or something. Tehillah. I guess I forgot already. Anyways, I guess this is the Gemara Shabbos equivalent of that parak of Tehillim. We're going to talk about carrying a kid who's carrying a thing. We're going to continue our discussion from yesterday, Rava's perspective on that. A basket filled with Truma Tameya and Truma Tahora / Chulin. How do you go about moving that? Medooma, the very thrilling sugya of what happens when some truma falls into some chulin. Relax, we'll get there, don't worry, we're going to get there soon. We just have a few things we have to do first. And then we're going to talk about moving a new Mishnah where we talk about moving a stone that is on top of a barrel and like basis ledavar ha'asr kind of things. Friends, let's get started. So at the end of the day yesterday, we began a new parak, the parak called Notel. And the Mishnah had said that you are permitted to carry a little guy who's got a pouch around his neck. Okay? Now, that was talking about in a chatzer. We're not talking about hotza'ah. We're not talking about going from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim and vice versa. We're talking about you're in your chatzer, okay? You're allowed to carry things in your chatzer, but you're not allowed to move muksa. And what we're saying is you're allowed to carry this little guy even though he's got some muksa around his neck. He's got this pouch around his neck. Now, Rava had said in the Gemara that you would not be allowed to carry from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim a child. I'm sorry. The Mishnah was not talking about a kid who's got something around his neck. The Mishnah was talking about a kid who's carrying a stone. But it's the same idea, right? The stone is muktzah, and you're allowed to carry the kid in the chatzer, even though he's carrying a stone, which is muktzah. Okay? Now, the Rava had said that you would not be allowed to take out a child from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim if he has a pouch around his neck. So while you would be allowed to carry the child from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, because Chai no se'es atzmo, somebody who's alive carries himself. However, the pouch that is around this child's neck is going to be a problem. Rava had also said that you would be allowed to carry a mace. If this child was not alive, you would be allowed to carry him from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, even though he has a pouch around his neck, because it's malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, which according to Rav Shimon be potter. So I guess maybe you wouldn't be allowed to, but at least you certainly wouldn't be chayiv according to Rav Shimon. Now, we are going to go, analyze a little bit and compare and contrast Rava's opinion, which is that you would not be allowed to carry a child from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim if he has a pouch around his neck. We're going to compare that with our Mishnah that says that you would be allowed to carry a child in a chatzer, even though he's carrying a stone. So the Gemara says, on Daf Kuf Mem Aleph, Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom, Tanan, Notel Adam es beno ve'evin biyado. So our Mishnah says that you would be allowed to carry a child in a chatzer, even though he is carrying a stone. Okay? So, but isn't the stone muktzah? And we seem to be saying that that's acceptable. So what it sounds like, therefore, from the Mishnah, is that an adult carrying a child who's carrying a stone, it is not like the adult is carrying the stone. The adult is carrying the child. The child's carrying a stone. We don't seem to be, concerned too much about that, and therefore we say it's not like the adult is carrying the muktzah stone. The adult is carrying the child. And the fact that the child is carrying the stone doesn't seem to be a big deal. Well, if that's the case, then why don't that sounds like it's a kasha on Rava. Rava, if this adult is carrying this child, and the child has a pouch around his neck, why should that be a problem of hotzah? Why shouldn't that be the same as the child who's carrying the stone, which there's no issue of muktzah for the adult to carry the child who's carrying the stone and walk around the chatzer? So I would argue that if an adult is carrying a child and the child has a pouch around his neck and he goes out to Rosh Hashanah, he should be potter, because after all, he's carrying the child. The child is carrying the pouch. We seem to not really care about that. So why is Rabbi saying that you'd be chayiv for that? So that's what we want to answer. Amr devei Rabbi Yanai b'tinuk sheyesh lo giaguin al aviv. So it was talking the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yanai that our Mishnah that says that the father would be allowed to walk around with his child who is carrying a stone, that is talking about a child who has a very intense longing for his father, such an intense longing that if his father doesn't hold him, he will get sick. So, being that we're talking about such a sensitive situation, the Chachamim, who, after all, this is only a Dirabanan thing, right? It's muktzah. So the Chachamim said, you know what? Don't worry about muktzah, parent. Rather, hold your child, even if he's holding the stone, rather than not pick him up and have him get sick. But if it was a child who didn't have intense longing for his father, so much so that he would get sick, well, then you would not be allowed to carry a child who's holding a stone, because after all, you would be carrying muktzah, and therefore as well, if you're carrying a child who's got a pouch around his neck from Rishus HaYachid into Rishus HaRabim, that's also going to be considered carrying, and you're going to be, what are you going to be, friends? Chayev for Hotzah. Okay. Ihachi, 1 second. If our Mishnah is talking about where this child has such intense longings for his father that he will get sick unless his father picks him up, even though he's holding a stone, that's why it's allowed. My irya even afilu dinar nami. Well then, why does the Mishnah stop at a stone? Take it a step further. Say that even if the child is carrying a coin, the father should be allowed to pick him up and carry him around so that he doesn't get sick. Alama Amar Rava, but why did Rava say Lo shanu ela even aval dinar aser? Why did Rava say that you'd only be allowed to pick up this child with a stone, but he says that a coin would not be allowed? And not only that, as Rashi points out, when it comes to the coin, even if the father wasn't even holding the child, even if the father was just holding the child's hand, and the child was walking next to him, but the child was also holding a stone, a coin, it also wouldn't be allowed. So what's the deal? We seem to be making a distinction between a stone and a coin, yet if we're talking about a situation where the child will get sick if the father doesn't pick him up, well, even a coin, he should be able to pick up the child so he doesn't get sick. So the Gemara answers, Eveni nafla lo asi avur li'isuye. Dinar inafil asi avur li'isuye. The nafkamina is that there's a difference between a stone and a coin in terms of that, well, if the father picks up the kid who has his great longings, and so much so that he'll get sick if he doesn't pick him up, and the kid is holding a stone, that's okay, because, better pick up the kid with the stone than for the kid to get sick. Now, what happens if the stone falls? Okay, so the stone fell. The father doesn't really care that much, so we're not concerned he's going to pick it up, and it's muksa. However, so therefore he's allowed to pick up the kid with the stone. However, if the kid is carrying a coin, we're concerned that, well, let's say the coin falls out of the kid's hand. Well, the father might not just want to leave it there. He might pick up the coin. That's why we say that he's not allowed to pick up the child who has a coin, because we're concerned that if it falls out of his hand, the father might pick up the coin and come to pick up muksa, which is not a concern when it comes to the stone. Now, Tani Kavasi de Rava. We have a brisa supporting Rava. What did Rava say? Rava said that if a adult goes out from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim carrying a child that has a pouch around his neck, he's going to be chayav for taking out for hotzah for the pouch. Okay, so we have a brisa supporting Rava. Hamotzi kelev mikupalim umunachim al kseifa. If a person goes out from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim with his clothing folded up and resting on his shoulder, v'sandalav v'taba'osav biyado, or he's got his shoes and his rings, but he's not wearing the shoes on his feet and he doesn't have rings on his fingers. Okay, so he's got, but he's not wearing these things. Rather, he's got sandals in his hands. He's carrying his sandals and he's carrying the rings. Okay. Chayev. So in those cases, he's chayev because he's not wearing these clothing; he's just carrying these clothing. So he's chayev. Fine. Potter. But if he was wearing these things, he was wearing his rings and he was wearing his shoes and he was wearing his clothing, well then he's potter. Hamotzi adam. If a person carries out another person, v'chelav alav, v'sandalav b'raglav, v'tabosav b'yadav, and this fellow, so you have Reuven is carrying Shimon, and Shimon is wearing his clothing, he's wearing his shoes, he's wearing his rings properly, potter v'ilu, here's the kicker, friends, v'ilu otzian kemos shehein chayev. However, if Reuven carried out Shimon, and Shimon was just carrying these items, well then Reuven is going to be chayev, even though he's carrying Shimon, and chayin osei atzmo, he's going to be chayev for carrying the things that Shimon is carrying. So therefore, here also, when an adult takes out a child to Rosh Hashanah, and the child has this pouch around his neck, the adult is going to be chayav for taking out that pouch that the child is carrying. Y'all got that? Of course you did. Let's move on. Kalkala ve'even b'socha. So if you have a basket, and in the basket is a stone, so we said that you're allowed to take out the basket with the stone. V'amai. Why? Tavi kalkala basas davar aser. Friends, the basket should be a basis l'davar asur, should be a base for something that's forbidden, right? So the stone's not allowed. So that should mean that the basket that the stone is in should be a base for this thing that is forbidden, for this stone, and you shouldn't be allowed to move the basket either. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hacha b'chalkala malei peris askinon. So Rabbi Bar Chana says, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that's a good point. However, this case is talking about where the basket was filled with fruits, and therefore that was the ikar. The fruits are the ikar, and because on account of the fruits you'd be allowed to move the basket, and the stone that is there is not going to mess that up. Is not going to prevent you from carrying the basket with the fruits. V'lejdinu l'feir v'nejdi le'evin v'ninkatinu b'yadayim. So the Gemara has a suggestion, which is, well, why don't you just dump out all the contents of the basket, fruits, stone, everything, and then collect the fruits, put them back in the basket, leave the stone on the ground, and then transport the basket. Now, I don't necessarily understand why this is a better solution, because you're going to be moving the stone when you dump it out of the basket. So if we're concerned that he's moving the basket and there's a stone in the basket, why aren't we concerned that, well, when you dump out the basket, you're also moving the stone? So why just dump out the basket? Just move the basket. I don't know. Anyways, the Gemara answers, Rabbi Ili Amarav Beperis Amitanfin. It's talking about fruits that are soft, fruits like strawberries, figs, grapes, things that will get ruined if you dump them on the floor. So therefore you can't do that. Hachinam Beperis Amitanfin. So just like Rabbi Ili Amarav was talking about wherever he was talking about fruits that can get ruined. Here also we're going to say that we're talking about fruits that are going to get ruined, therefore don't dump them out on the floor. Okay, but even if you're not going to dump them out on the floor, but maybe just kind of wiggle around the basket, shake it around a bit until you separate the fruits from the stone, and then just dump the stone out and leave all the fruits darting. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rava, Hacha b'chalkala pchusa askinon. Devin Gufanais is Dofin L'Chalkala, finds the sister of Chia bar Ashi in the name of Rava, which is very interesting because usually Rav Chia bar Ashi is quoting Rav. Actually, as we're going to even see on this very daf on Kuf Mem Beis and Beis, often Rav Chia bar Ashi is quoting Rav. So it's interesting that he's quoting Rava because Rava is much younger. So I don't know. In any event, so it says Rav Chia bar Ashi in the name of Rava that here we're talking about a basket that is a pretty low quality basket. It's shtickle falling apart. Right, the Evan Gufa Nice is Stofin L'Chakal, and you're actually depending on the stone to actually be a wall for the basket. So like, you can't just dump it out because you actually kind of need it. Okay, Seder. So, but the interesting thing is that it does imply that if the stone wasn't needed as part of the, structure of the basket, you should dump it out. And I don't really understand why, because you're going to be moving the basket to dump out the stone anyways. And then, what does that even mean also for like buses? Like, I thought that the original answer was pretty good, which is that, well, you have a bunch of fruits in there, and because of the fruits, it makes the basket not a bus. You can carry the basket for the fruits, and the fact that there's a stone there isn't such a big deal. Like, why should you have to like get rid of it? I don't know. Like, wiggling the stone would be moving it anyways, and I feel like you should. The only reason why maybe you can wiggle it is because of the fruits anyways. Maybe we just don't want you. If you can get rid of it, just get rid of it anyways. Because why? Maybe that's the idea. That meaning, yeah, because of the fruits, it's not a basis l'davar aser because there's the fruits over there which make it acceptable. Now, at the same time, if you can get rid of the stone by wiggling it out or something, so by all means, wiggle it out. Yeah, maybe that's the point. Like, if you can, just do it. Why not? Maybe that's the point. But at the same time, like, the fruits would make it movable. What do you guys think? Weiter. Metaltlin truma v'chule. This is interesting. Maybe if you're into this kind of stuff. So the Mishnah had said that if you have truma tahora and truma tameya, you're allowed to move it because on account of the truma tahora or the chulin. If you have truma tahora or chulin, but you also have truma tameya over there, so you can move the whole mixture. So if, let's say, a basket filled with truma tahora and truma tameya, you can move the basket. Amr of Chizda lo shanu ela shetahora lemata utmeya lema'ala. So Rav Chizda says, friends, there is a little more to the story, which is that when we say that you can move this basket that has truma tahora and truma tameya in it, it depends where it's located. When we say that you can move the basket, that is only if the truma tahora is on the bottom, but the top layer is all truma tameya. And therefore, to extract the truma tahora, you're going to have to move the truma tameya with your hands and remove it from the top layer. And that would be moving muktzah. So we say, you know what? Instead of moving the muktzah truma tameya in order to get to the truma tahora that's on the bottom of the basket, pick up the whole basket, bring it over to the table, dump it all out on the table, and then take the truma tahora. Aval tahora lemala utmeya lemata. But what if only the bottom layer of the basket was the truma tameya, but the top layers of the basket was truma tahora? Shakale l'torah v'shavakle l'tmeya. Then what you should do is, rather than picking up the whole basket, including the truma tameya, how about this? Just take the truma tahora that are the top layers, take it, bring that over to the table, and just leave the truma tameya in the basket where it is. And that way you don't have to move the truma tameya at all. That is Rav Chizda's suggestion. So therefore, when the Mishnah says that you can move the truma tameya with the truma tahora, it's only talking about when the truma tameya is the top layer of the basket. V'chi tahora lamata nami lejdenu v'lin katinu. The Gemara asks, but even when the truma tahora is at the bottom, and the top layer is the truma tameya, and we say in that case, carry it over to the table and dump it out on the table. Why don't you just dump it out on the floor, and then pick up the truma tahora, put it back in the basket, and then just take the basket with only the truma tahora to the table? Reb Ili, Amarav, Beperes, Amitan, Finaskinan says, Reb Ili, Amarav, we're talking about fruits that will get ruined if you do that, they'll get dirty, they'll get ruined if you do that, therefore you can't do that, so rather just bring it all to the table and dump it out on the table and then take the truma tahora. Fine. Meisvei, we have a kasha against Rav Chizda from a brisa. What does the brisa say? Metaltlin truma tameya ima tahora v'ima chulin. So you can move truma tameya with truma tahora and with chulin. Okay, fine. Bein shetahora lemala utmeya lemata. Bein shetmeya lemala utahora lemata. Now this is regardless of what's on top and what's on the bottom. Regardless of if the tahora is at the top and the tameya is at the bottom, or whether the tameya is at the top and the tahora is at the bottom. Makes absolutely no difference. We don't say that if the tahora is on top, you have to pick it up and carry it over to the table and leave the tameya at the bottom. Don't move the basket with the tameya. We don't say that. It says it makes no difference what's on top and what's on bottom. Rav Chizda, what you going to do about that? Tiyuf to Rav Chizda. Amar lach Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, no, you're not going to get rid of me so quickly. Masnisin l'tzorach gufo brayso l'tzorach mekomo. Our Mishnah that I'm explaining as saying that it's only talking about where the truma tameya is on top, and that's why you're allowed to move it. That is talking about where it is l'tzorach gufo, meaning you just want to eat it, right? L'tzorach gufo, you want to eat the food. And therefore, since you want to eat the food, like you don't care that the basket is where it is, the basket's in a fine place, but you want to eat the contents of the basket. So we say, well, if the Truma Tahora is on top, so just take the Truma Tahora and bring it over to the table and eat it, rather than having to move the Truma Tameh at all. However, the Brisa that says that regardless of what's on top and what's on the bottom, you can move it, that is talking about where you need the tzorech mekomo. The basket is in a bad place. You want to put something else where the basket is. In that case, we say, well, it doesn't matter what's on top and what's on bottom anymore. You can nonetheless move it to get it out of a bad spot. However, if it's in a fine spot and you just want to eat the stuff in the basket, well, then if the Truma Tahora is on top, just take out the Truma Tahora, bring it over to the table and eat it. Okay. The Gemara says, "My duchke du Rav Chisda l'ukmei masnisin l'tzorech gufo." So the Gemara says, okay, fine, very good. I mean, so Rav Chisda says that, he could defend his explanation of the Mishnah, say that it's talking about the tzorech gufo, and that's why you can only move it if the Truma Tahora is on top. No, you can only move it if the Truma Tameh is on top. If the Truma Tahora is on top, don't move it. But why? Like, why complicate things? Why not just say that it's talking about the tzorech mikomo, and you can move it no matter what's on top? So Rava masnisin kavase daika. Rava says, no, don't pick on Rav Chisda. The Mishnah actually makes sense to be explained like him. Tikatani seifa, because if you keep on reading in the Mishnayos, the Mishnah that we're going to learn soon on Daf Kuf Mem Beis Mem Beis, it says, Mos she'ala kar minar esakar, or maybe care. Mos she'ala kar minar esakar ve'noflos. That if you have money on a cushion, and you want to lie down on the cushion, or I guess we're going to figure out what exactly he wants to do with the cushion in a second from now, but basically you have money on a cushion, so the suggestion is just, shake the money off of the cushion. That's the suggestion. And says, Rabbi Chanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that when the Mishnah gives this suggestion to just shake the coins off of the cushion, it's talking about where you want to use the cushion itself, i.e. you want to lie down on it. So if you want to lie down on the cushion, it's in a perfectly good spot, you just want to lie down on it, but there's money, so shake off the money and then you can lie down on it. But if it was a tzorech mekomo, i.e. if the cushion was in a bad spot, well then you can move the cushion with the money on it and just move it somewhere else. So here also, right, when we the seifa the tzorech gufo, reishanami the tzorech gufo, from the fact that the seifa is talking about the tzorech gufo, so therefore it makes sense for Rav Chisda to say that the reisha, where we're saying that you can carry the Truma Tameh with the Truma Tahora, is also talking about where you need it, the tzorech gufo, to eat it, and that is why Rav Chisda is saying that it's only when the Truma Tameh is on top, but if the Truma Tameh is on the bottom, well then just take the stuff that you want and take that to the table, leave the Truma Tameh, don't move it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af Mailin v'chulei. Now, Rabbi Yehuda had said in the Mishnah that you can, in a case where Medooma, what's Medooma? Medooma is when you have chulin, okay? Now, some truma falls into the chulin. Bummer. All the chulin is now considered like truma, and you give it to the Kohen. We have to treat it all like truma. You give it to the Kohen, and that is that. However, and this is all midrabanan, if I'm not mistaken. So, now, however, if one, as we said in Rashi yesterday, if you have one sa'ah of truma that falls into 100 sa'ah of chulin, so you have, right, 101th of this mixture is truma. In that case, we treat it as though the truma is batel, and we don't treat it as truma, and you're allowed to eat this medooma. However, we say that before you eat it, first separate away that one sa'ah and give it to the Kohen so that he doesn't lose out on what otherwise would have been his truma, right? He had a sa'ah of truma, it now fell into all this chulin, he just lost his truma, so take a sa'ah, give it to the Kohen, and now you can eat it, but we don't say that it's all considered like it's truma, as we would say if it was less than this ratio. So for example, if one part of one sa'ah of truma fell into 99 sa'ahs of chulin, well then it would all be considered truma. I guess then the Kohen kind of scores. I guess be careful when you have coins around. Make sure it doesn't, mysteriously somehow some truma is going to end up in your chulin, and oops, I guess you got to give it all to the kohen. Can't trust coins around. Anyways, fine. So if it's 1 sa'ah of truma falls into 100 sa'ah of chulin, well then it's not going to, you just separate 1 sa'ah, give it to the kohen, and now you can eat it. And Rabbi Yehuda says you can even do that on Shabbos. That is what we are going to focus on right now. Ve'amai, how come you would be allowed to separate this sa'ah on Shabbos and give it to the kohen? How come misakin? Isn't it misakin? After all, you're not allowed to separate truma and meiser from tevel on Shabbos because it's misakin. So why can you separate this sa'ah of truma and give it to the kohen on Shabbos? So we're going to try to figure out why. So first we say Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eliezer svirle. That Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Eliezer. To amar truma ba'ina machta. So ba'ina over here I believe comes from like the word ba'en, like on its own, as its own unit. So for example, if we think about tevel, for example, we say that you're not allowed to separate truma and meiser from tevel on Shabbos because it's basically a mixture. And this mixture, or you have basically this one unit of tevel, and you have to separate out of it truma and give that to the kohen. Okay? So the point being that you have this one big unit of tevel, and you are being misaka in this unit of tevel by separating out the truma and the meiser and giving it to the kohen and the levi, whatever it might be. Therefore, and that's what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, to be misaka in this tevel. However, if we can make an argument that actually this sa'ah of truma that is in this chulin is not actually mixed together with this chulin, it remains separate from the chulin, well then giving it to the kohen is not actually fixing this 100 sa'ah of chulin. It was never actually mixed into. We don't treat it as if the truma was actually ever mixed in to the rest of the chulin. If we can argue that it remains separate, even once it has fallen in, it nonetheless remains separate from the chulin, well then we could say that when we take this sa'ah and give it to the kohen, we aren't actually fixing this 100 sa'ah of truma, of chulin, because it was never actually part of the 100 sa'ah of chulin. And that's what we're going to try to prove now, according to Rabbi Eliezer and also according to Reb Shimon. So, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer, Svirle. Rabbi Yehuda, so first we want to say that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar Truma Be'ena Machta, that even once the Truma falls into the Chulin, it still remains its own unit. It doesn't actually, we don't treat it as if it gets mixed together with the rest of the Chulin. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Sa'a Truma Shenafla Lefachos Mimea. So if you have 1 Sa'a of Truma that fell into less than 100 Sa'a of Chulin, okay, Rashi gives a number 1/60th. I don't think it has to be 1/60th, but that's just the number that he gives that's less than 100. V'nidme'u, and now you have Medooma, right? You have this chulin and truma. You have 1 part truma, 60 parts chulin. V'nafal, now here we go. V'nafal min ha'medooma l'makom acher. Now to make things easier, this mixture, that 1 part is truma and 60 parts are chulin, now let's say one sa'ah of this medooma now falls into some other stuff. Let's just say it was another 60 parts. So how do you treat it? How do you treat this new sort of medooma situation? Is it mutter? Is it aser? So Rabbi Eliezer omer midamas kesrumas vadai v'chacham omer ein hameduma midameh el lefi cheshbon. So Rabbi Eliezer says, well, we treat it as though this truma that fell into the initial 60 parts, 60 sa'ah of chulin, we treat it as if this original truma didn't actually get mixed in and mixed throughout the chulin. Rather, we treat it as though it remained its own unit, and therefore we have to be concerned that when a sa'ah now comes from this Medooma and ends up in this other, let's say 60 sa'ah of chulin, well, we have to be concerned that the sa'ah that came from the Medooma and went into the new 60 sa'ah of chulin, we have to be concerned that this sa'ah was entirely that truma that had initially fallen in to the first group of 60 sa'ah of chulin. Oy vey. I still got you guys, right? Gosh, I don't even know how to explain that clearer. So, okay, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that original sa'ah of truma that fell into the first group of 60 sa'ah of chulin. Now a sa'ah now falls out of this original Medooma group and falls into another group of 60 sa'ah of chulin. We have to be concerned that what fell into the second group was that complete original sa'ah of truma. It didn't get mixed through the original 60 sa'ah of chulin. Whereas the Chachamim say, no, it gets scattered. We have to treat it as if it's a mixture. As if when the original sa'ah of truma fell in to the 60 sa'ah of chulin, it got mixed and dispersed throughout the entire mixture. And now when a sa'ah comes from the original Medooma and falls into this new group, well, only 1/61st of it is going to be truma, and now it falls into this other mixture, then it's going to be like 1/61st divided by 1/61st. It's a very small percentage, and it's not going to be Medooma anymore. It's going to be batal. So therefore, we want to argue that Rabbi Yehuda is like Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Yehuda, by saying that you can take a sa'ah of truma from on Shabbos, from when there's one sa'ah of truma and 100 sa'ah of chulin, you could take this sa'ah and give it to the kohen because it was never actually mixed. It wasn't actually a mixture. It's not like you're fixing the mixture by giving this sa'ah to the kohen. It never actually got mixed in, just like Rabbi Eliezer says that the truma doesn't actually get mixed in, and therefore you're just taking a sa'ah. We can assume that it's this entire sa'ah of truma which never actually got mixed into the chulin, and that's what you're giving to the kohen, but you're not actually fixing the chulin because it's never as if it was all just one big mixture with truma and chulin, and by separating the sa'ah, you're like fixing this mixture. No, it's not like that. It's two separate entities, and you're just taking the sa'ah of truma and giving it to the kohen. But the Gemara asks, maybe not. Eimer d'shamasle l'chumra l'kulam yishamasle. 1 second. When Rabbi Eliezer says that we have to treat it as if that original sa'ah of truma that fell into the 60 sa'ah of chulin, and then it falls into the second group of chulin, we say that we have to be concerned that the sa'ah that fell into the second group was the original sa'ah of truma that fell into the first group. That's obviously a chumrah, to say that the second group is also Medooma, and you can't eat it and you have to give it to the kohen. Unlike the Chachamim who said, no, you can just view it as a percentage, and that second group is only going to have a tiny percentage of truma. But Rabbi Eliezer says, no, we don't treat it as if it's mixed in, and we treat it as if this sa'ah of truma remains separate. We have to be concerned that it entirely fell into the second group. But that's obviously l'chumra, to say that the entire second group has to be given to the kohen. You can't eat it. But I don't know that Rabbi Eliezer would say that l'kula, as a leniency, to say that on Shabbos you'd be allowed to separate the Medooma, this one sa'ah from the 100 sa'ah of chulin, because it's considered separate, and allow you to eat this Medooma on Shabbos. We don't know that Rabbi Eliezer would say that. Elahu d'amar krib Shimon. Rather, Rabbi Yehuda says like Reb Shimon. Okay, what does Reb Shimon say? Kedisnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Sa'ah Truma, Shenafla Lemeya. If you have one Sa'ah of Truma that falls into 100 Sa'ah of Chulin, okay, very good, fine. So, it's, you can just separate one Sa'ah, give it to the kohen, fine. V'lo hispig la'agbia ad shenafla acheres. However, what happened is, before you had a chance to separate a Sa'ah and give it to the kohen, guess what happened? Another sa'ah of truma fell into this chulin. So now, it depends how you look at it. One way to look at it would be to say, well, you lost your ratio. you have one sa'ah, you have 2 sa'ahs of truma to 100 sa'ah of chulin. That ratio is too high. You need 1 sa'ah of truma to 100 sa'ah of chulin. Here you have 2 sa'ah now of truma for 100 sa'ah of chulin. So areza asura, it's asur, the ratio is off. Reb Shimon matir, Reb Shimon says that it's mutter. So what we want to say is that, why does Reb Shimon say that when 1 sa'ah of truma falls into the 100 sa'ah of chulin, and then another sa'ah of truma falls into the 100 sa'ah of chulin? Reb Shimon says it's mutter. Why? So what we want to say is, well, because that original sa'ah of truma that fell into the 100 sa'ah of chulin remains separate, and it didn't get mixed in to the mixture and make it all Medooma. And therefore, when the second one falls in, you now have this mixture that has 2 sa'ahs of truma mixed into 100 sa'ah of chulin, and the ratios are off. No, if we want to argue that according to Reb Shimon, that original sa'ah of truma remains separate from the rest of the 100 sa'ah of chulin, and for that reason, when the second sa'ah of truma fell into the mixture, it fell into a mixture of 100 sa'ah of chulin, not a mixture, not this one big mixture of 2 sa'ah of truma and 100 sa'ah of chulin, which would be too high of a ratio, or too low of a ratio. But the Gemara says maybe that is not right, and then obviously we're going to say that Reb Shimon would be Reb Yehuda would be like Reb Shimon, and say that the truma always remains separate, and you're not actually fixing a mixture, you're just giving a sa'ah of truma to the kohen. Umimai, how come Reb Shimon is our guy? Dilma hasam behakam ifligei. Maybe the following is the machlokas in this Mishnah, where 2 sa'ah of truma fall into 100 sa'ah of chulin. The Tana kama savar afagav denaflu b'zeh achazek kaman denaflu b'basa achaz dami. V'halacham shenafla v'halacham shenafla. Maybe, well, we could treat it that according to the Tana Kama, he'll say that even though the 2 sa'ah of truma fell one after the other, the Tana Kama nonetheless treats it as if they fell at the same exact time. And therefore, you basically had 2 sa'ah of truma that fell into 100 sa'ah of chulin, and the ratio is to, I don't know if the word is high or low, but you need a ratio of 1 versus 100, not 2 versus 100. And therefore, it's as if one of these, as the Gemara says, as if 1 sa'ah of truma fell into 50 sa'ah of chulin, and the other sa'ah of truma fell into 50 sa'ah of chulin. We need 1 sa'ah of truma to 100 sa'ah of chulin. Whereas Reb Shimon savar kamaisa batal b'me'ah v'hati batal b'me'ah v'chad. Whereas Reb Shimon is going to hold that, no, what happened was when the first sa'ah of truma fell into the 100 sa'ah of chulin, well then that first sa'ah of truma immediately becomes batel, nullified to the 100 sa'ah of chulin, and it doesn't exist anymore. Now you just have 101 sa'ah of chulin. That 1 sa'ah of truma became completely batel. And then when the second sa'ah of truma falls into the 100 sa'ah, to the now 101 sa'ah of chulin, well then this second sa'ah of truma now becomes completely batel. Which means that you now have one big mixture that has a little bit, that has 2 sa'ah of truma in it, and 100 sa'ah of chulin, but all that truma is just considered batel within, and mixed together in that chulin. And what we say is now, in order to eat it, you have to separate, whether it's 1, I don't know now if it's 1 sa'ah or 2 sa'ah, and probably 2 sa'ah, I guess, and give it to the kohen. So we do see that there is a mixture. So on the one hand, you could still separate what you need to separate and give it to the kohen, because, you never had less than 1 sa'ah of truma to 100 parts, at least 100 parts of chulin, because everything became batel as it fell in. But at the same time, it's one big mixture, and therefore I would argue that if this was on Shabbos, by taking out what you have to and give it to the kohen, it would be fixing the mixture. Okay, so still, when Rabbi Yehuda says that you could take this 1 sa'ah of truma and give it to the kohen on Shabbos, why, we're still trying to figure out why that wouldn't be a problem in terms of fixing a mixture. So Elahu the Amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Okay, so we're going to try to say that Rabbi Yehuda says like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The Tanyas, we learn in a brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, nosen einav b'tzad zeh v'ochel b'tzad acher. Okay, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says what you could do is, when you have this mixture of 100 sa'ah of chulin and 1 sa'ah of truma, so what you could do is you could just look at one side, kilu, place your eye on one side and say, okay, this is what I'm going to set aside for, he doesn't actually set it aside, but he says, look, this is what I'm going to set aside for the Kohen and give to the Kohen. That's going to be the sa'ah of truma that I give to the Kohen. And while he does it, he doesn't even have to separate anything. He now just starts eating from the rest of it. So we see that according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, you're not fixing anything when you separate the sa'ah and give it to the Kohen. Because you can eat it already the way it is. You just look at one part and say, this is what I'm going to give to the Kohen. You can already start eating. So separating this sa'ah and giving it to the Kohen isn't fixing anything. It was already fixed. You could already eat it. So we want to say that Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you can give it to the Kohen, is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. You're not actually fixing anything. It's already fixed. But one second. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar argues on Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanyas, we learn in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that Rabbi Yehuda says, as we saw in our Mishnah, that when you have this Medooma, 1 part truma, 1 sa'ah of truma, 100 sa'ah of chulin. So Rabbi Yehuda says that you just take the 1 sa'ah and give it to the Kohen, and that is going to be what you separate as the truma. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, no, you don't. You're not allowed to separate the sa'ah and give it to the Kohen on Shabbos. But what you can do, since you can eat it the way it is, you can just, say, look, this is what I'm going to set aside later. You can look at that side and say, this is what's going to be for the Kohen, and start eating the rest. So there's no reason why you should separate that 1 sa'ah and give it to the Kohen. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda goes one step further and says you can even separate that 1 sa'ah and give it to the Kohen. So we see, to Rabbi Yehuda, adif from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that Rabbi Yehuda takes it one step further than Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and says that you even separate that 1 sa'ah and give it to the Kohen. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is in a league of his own, which of course is acceptable because Rabbi Yehuda is as much of a Tana as Rabbi Shimon, as Rabbi Eliezer, and as Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar are. So he's allowed to have his own opinion. Okay, wow. Okay. I have no doubt in my mind that you all got that. I have a lot of faith in everybody at Babylon Talmud. Babylon Talmud only gets the best of the best. It's amazing. Somehow, we just managed to get the best of the best. Baruch Hashem. Okay. It says the Mishnah, Ha'evan sha'api achavis, if you have a stone that is on a barrel, okay, so you have a barrel, you got wine in the barrel, you want to drink the wine in the barrel. Problem, there's a stone on top of the barrel. What do? What's the solution to the problem? So the solution is mata al tzida v'nofeles. So you can just tilt the barrel on its side, and the stone will fall off of the barrel. Haisa ben achavios, if the barrel was among other barrels, what do? Meaning, if we're concerned that if you tilt the barrel and the stone falls off, it might break surrounding barrels. So magbia umata al tzida v'nofeles. So what you do is you lift it up, bring it somewhere else, and then tilt it so that in a safe space where you know that the stone will not break anything. If you have money that is on a cushion, so you just shake the cushion a shtickle, and then they will fall off. Okay, fine. So if you have this, if this cushion was dirty a shtickle, so then you can take a rag and you can kind of, try to clean it off like that, but no water. Because that would be like bathing. That would be like laundering. Haisa shel or nosan alei amayim ad shetichle. If, however, the cushion was made out of hide, where you don't really launder hide, so you can, at least not in that way, so you can add water, and that would be acceptable. Amar Rav Huna, says the Gemara, that Rav Huna says Amar Rav, in the name of his Rebbe Rav. I believe that Rav and Rav Huna were both in the city of Sura. Lo shanu ela b'shocheach, ava b'maniach Nice basis l'davar aser. Friends, listen up. We actually saw this in Daf Kuf Chaf Hey Amud Beis, but says Rav Huna in the name of Rav that when we say that you're allowed to tilt this barrel and the stone will fall off, that is only if you forgot the stone on the barrel. But if you intentionally put the stone on the barrel, well then the barrel becomes a basis l'davar aser, a base for something aser for this stone, and then you can't move the barrel either, and therefore you wouldn't be able to tilt it so that the stone falls off. The Mishnah said that if you had a barrel among other barrels, so you could take it and move it somewhere else and then tilt it, meaning if you're concerned that the stone, when it falls off, it could break surrounding barrels, so you can bring it somewhere else and then tilt it and have it fall off. Now, friends, I must tell you, this next bit of Gemara, you have to be a little flexible here. It doesn't really make that much sense. So if you're cool with that, then you won't have an issue with this Gemara. If you're not cool with that, so my recommendation, my suggestion is take a deep breath and convince yourself that it'll all be okay. Mantana d'chol heicha de'ika isura ve'atera tarchinan be'isura lo tarchinan. The Gemara wants to know. I'm going to read that again. Mantana, who is the author, who is the teacher, the Tana? D'chol heicha de'ika isura ve'atera, that wherever you have isur and you have heter, so such as here, you have the barrel. The barrel is mutter, barrel of wine. The stone, on the other hand, is aser, it's muksa. So be'atera tarchinan be'isura lo tarchinan. So we're going to suggest that the tircha that you should do is with the barrel, right? To pick up the barrel and move it to a place where there are no other barrels, and you're going to pick up the barrel with the stone on it, schlep it somewhere else, so that you could then tilt the barrel and knock off the stone. We'd rather suggest that you do that, right, and slide off, and the stone will slide off. We'd rather you do that than just to push it, pick up the stone, and put it somewhere else. So who is, right, so again, the barrel being the mutter thing, the stone being the aser thing, so we prefer that you sort of exert energy in the context of the mutter thing, of the barrel, rather than exert energy to remove the stone. So, who is the author that would say that? So we want to argue that it's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, borer kitnis b'yomtiv. Okay, somebody who is selecting beans on yomtiv. So you have beans, and in the beans there might be like epis, mud, and other muksa stuff that you don't want. So there's two things here. A, there's muksa, and B, there is borer. So Bishamai omrim borer ochel ve'ochel. So Bishamai says, look, this is no different than any other borer that's not allowed to be done on Shabbos. And what you can do is, you could take the ochel, you could take the beans that you want, and take the ones that you want and eat them, right? Do borer in a permitted way. Beisil argues in Bisham, and they said, no, you can just do borer however the heck you want, right? If you want to take the dirt and the stones and whatever might be there and separate them, you know, take the psolas from the ochel, that's fine as well, okay? And right, so b'cheiko b'tamchoy on his lap or with some kind of like a plate that he's sorting on. Vitanya, and we learn in the Brisa, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, b'metzvah memorim, when do Beis Hillel say that you'd be allowed to remove the psoles from the ochel, is sha'ochel meruba ala psoles. It's when there is more ochel than psoles. Kilu, if there's lots of beans and just a bit of like these, you know, rocks and things, so you'd be allowed to remove the psoles. Aval psoles meruba ala ochel, but if there's lots of rocks and things and not as much food, not as much beans, well then divrei hakol borer ochel. Well then everyone's going to agree that you're going to remove the ochel. Okay, so if there's more ochel than psoles, so that is where, so according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, that is where Beis Hillel says that you'd be allowed to remove the psoles, because it's easier to just remove the psoles when there's a lot more ochel. However, it says Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, in the case where there's more psoles than ochel, and it's easier to take out the ochel, well then everyone's going to agree that you should remove the ochel from the psoles. And therefore, the Gemara wants to argue that it's Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who would be the author of our Mishnah, who says better to move the barrel, which is the mutter stuff, which is like the ochel, which is like the beans, rather than to move the stone, which is the psoles, which is like rocks and things. Fine. Great. You got that? It's like, don't, if the logic doesn't really add up in your mind so much, don't fuss about it. But what about over here? Well, meaning, because if you go back to Reb Shimon Gamliel's argument, he said that in a case where there's more ochel than psoles, right? In a place where there's more beans than there are like stones and dirt, so we say that you can just remove the stones and dirt according to Beis Hillel. So why wouldn't we say the same thing here? Which is, there's a lot more barrel and wine than there is stone. So why don't you just remove the stone, just like you would say that you would remove the psoles, right? Just like when there's a lot more beans than there are psoles, you can remove the psoles. Well, there's a lot more barrel and wine than there is rock. So why don't you just remove the rock or stone? So the Gemara gives an interesting answer, which is hacha nami. Well, here also by the barrel and the stone, it's actually not a case of more ochel than psolos. It's actually a case of more psolos than ochel, and that's why the suggestion is to move the barrel, which is the ochel equivalent. So hacha nami here also came in the ibay lemishkal lo mishtakil leyayin adishakila. That since in this case, if you wanted to really extract all of the wine from the barrel, if you wanted to get all of the wine out of the barrel, well, you wouldn't be able to do that without removing the stone. You're going to have to remove it eventually. Well, then, meaning, the Gemara wants to say, so apparently, yeah, it's a kind of a weird answer. I looked at the art scroll to get some context. Basically, what the Gemara wants to answer is that it would require more energy to first remove the stone and then pick up the barrel and pour out all the contents. That would require more energy than to just pick up all of the barrel with like the stone, move it somewhere else, and then tilt the barrel for the stone to come off, and then remove the content. And therefore, since it would require more exertion to have to remove the stone and then take out the contents of the barrel separately, well, therefore the stone is considered like it's more psoles than there is ochel, and that is why you would remove the barrel, which is like the ochel here, rather than meaning the barrel with the stone, which is all the ochel here, rather than remove the psoles, because it's like there's less ochel than there is psoles, since you're going to have to remove the stone anyways. Got it? I don't know. I feel like it's a weird answer. Okay. And that's why you just move the barrel with the stone. So the Mishnah said that if you have the barrel among the stones, if you have a barrel among other barrels, well then what you do is you take the barrel and you move it somewhere else, and then you tilt the stone and the barrel and the stone falls off. Tani Rabbi Yossi, Omer says Rabbi Yossi, Haisa achavis munachas be'otzar, if you have a barrel that is in a like storage house, like with other barrels and stuff, or there was glass underneath it, there's no big chiddush over here. So Rabbi Yossi says, look, if you had this barrel that was among other barrels or other things that could break, and you're nervous to tilt the barrel and the stone will fall off and break other things, so you could just pick up the barrel with the stone, move it somewhere else, tilt the barrel, stone falls off, take out what you want from the barrel, put the barrel back. Okay. Ma'uz shalaker, we said that if you have money that is on a cushion, Amar Rav Chiya bar Ashi Amar Rav, so we see Rav Chiya bar Ashi in the name of Rav, right? I said before that it was strange that Rav Chiya bar Ashi was quoting Rava, over here he's quoting Rav. Lo shanu elab shocheach, when we say that you're allowed to tilt the cushion and the money will fall off, that's only if you forgot the money on the cushion. But if you intentionally put the money on the cushion before Shabbos, nice a basis davar aser, well then the cushion becomes a basis for something that is aser, and you will not be able to tilt the cushion so that the money falls off. Amar Rava bar bar Chana, Amar Reb Yochanan, lo shanu el tzorech gufo. When they say that you tilt the money and it falls off, that is only if you want the cushion for to lie down on it. So just tilt the cushion, money will fall off, you can lie down on it. Aval tzorech mikomo. But if the cushion is pasha in a bad place and you just want to get it out of the way, well then mitaltalo ve'odan olav, you could just move it even with the money on it. V'chein tani chia bar Rab midifti lo shanu el letzorach gufo aval letzorach mekomo mitaltalo ve'odan olav. That's the same thing that chia bar Rab midifti taught, which is that if it's tzorach gufo, so then you just wiggle it and get off the coins. But if it's tzorach mekomo, you can pasha move the gans zach, the gans cushion. Moshe ala ker minaino v'chulei. Amr Reb Oshaya shachach arniki b'chatzer. What happens if you forget your wallet in your chatzer? Maniach alav kikar o tinok umitaltalo. You can put on this wallet, either you could put a loaf of bread on top of it or a baby on top of it, and then you can move the wallet as while you're carrying the baby or the loaf of bread on top of it. We saw something similar on Daf Lamed Amud Beis when David HaMelech died, and Shlomo went to the Beis HaMedrash to ask, what he should do. So they said, just put a loaf of bread or a baby on top of David HaMelech, and then you can carry David HaMelech with the baby or the loaf of bread. Amr Rav Yitzchak shachach leveina b'chatzer. Rav Yitzchak says, if you forgot a brick in your chatzer, I feel like a wallet is a lot scarier than a brick, but in any event, maniach ala kikar o tinok u'metaltal, you could put a loaf of bread or a baby on the brick and you can move it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shila Amar Rav Asi pam achas shachachu desakim le'amos bisratya. One time they forgot a pouch that was filled with money in a Rishus Harabim. Ba'u v'shalu es Rabbi Yochanan. So then they asked Rabbi Yochanan, what do we do? So he said, well, just take a loaf of bread or a baby, put it on the pouch of money, carry the pouch of money with the bread or the baby on it, and all will be fine. Amar Mar Zutra says that Mar Zutra hilchasa kecholani shmaitza b'shocheach. So Mar Zutra says that the halacha is like all of these cases, that you can put a loaf of bread or a baby on something muksa and carry it, as long as you forgot that muksa thing there. But if you intentionally put the muksa thing there before Shabbos, you wouldn't be allowed to push it, put a loaf of bread or a baby on it and carry it. Rav Ashi Amar afilu shachach nami lo v'lo amu kikar otinok el lemeis bilvad. Rav Ashi said, even if you forgot the item there, you can't just put a loaf of bread or a baby on it and carry it. The only time that you can do that is for a mace, as we saw with David HaMelech. Abaye manach kappa akife. Abaye put a spoon on a bundle of wheat and carried the bundle of wheat. Okay. Rava Manach, even though a bundle of raw wheat is muksa on Shabbos, there's nothing to do with it, but Abaye just took a spoon, which you're allowed to carry, put it on the bundle of wheat and carried it. Rava Manach Sakina Abaryona Umitatla. Rava took a knife and put it on raw dove meat and then carried the raw dove meat. Rav Yosef Kamachrifa Shmaitza Dardike. Rav Yosef said, wow, how smart these young whippersnappers are, right? Both Abaye and Rava were younger than Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef was sarcastically saying, wow, look at these geniuses, look at these chachams, that they are so smart that they take something that's not muksa and put it on top of something muksa and carry it all. I'll say that, if you forgot something, so then you could put, a loaf of bread or a baby and carry it. But you can't just do that milichatchila. Amar Abaye ilav da adam chashuvana kapa akife lamali. It's a very interesting answer. Abaye says, look, at the end of the day, you're allowed to move a bundle of wheat. You can use it to lean on it. You can use this bundle of wheat, therefore it's bichlal not muksa. However, the fact of the matter is, I'm a Rosh Yeshiva, and if people see me doing things on Shabbos, they might draw their own conclusions, and they might think that the bundle of wheat is muksa, and you're allowed to move muksa on Shabbos. So as an extra precaution, I put a spoon there to show that, you can't just carry things that are muksa. Which is interesting, because it does make a shtickle of a confusing experience. Like when you don't actually need to do something, but you do it anyways, that kind of gets confusing. Amar Rava, Ana ilav dadam chashuvana sakina abaryona lamali achazi li leumtza. Whereas Rava says a very similar answer, which is also, look, at the end of the day, I'm a Rosh Yeshiva, I'm an Adam Chashuv, I don't want people to get the idea and think they can carry muksa, therefore I put this knife on this raw meat. But the fact of the matter is, this raw meat, I can eat it raw. As Rashi says something which I found a little funny, which is like, v'ochlim basar chai v'karu la umtza. People who were like, Rava was a fancy guy, so he would eat raw meat, I guess if it was prepared well. But they don't call it raw meat. They call it umtza. Like, meaning it's shtickle marketing, shtickle branding. They eat raw meat, but they don't like to call it raw meat. They like to call it umtza. Anyways, friends, we're going to hold it over here. That was daf Kuf Mem Beis. Wow, a little bit of a hard daf. Okay, what can I tell you? So, all right, let's review what we learned. So at the beginning, we talked about carrying a kid who's carrying a thing. So we said if it's in a chatzer, so you can carry a child who's carrying a stone in a chatzer, but only if the kid is going to get sick, meaning if the kid mamish needs the father to carry him, otherwise he's going to get sick, well, then you can carry him in the chatzer. Better to carry the kid with the stone than to get sick. Than for him to get sick. However, if it's money, then don't carry him, because if it falls, then you might be tempted to pick it up. Now, if you want to take out a kid to Rosh Hashanah, well, then that's a different story, because that's actually a din de oraisa of Otzah, in which case you would not be allowed to carry out this kid to Rosh Hashanah because he got this pouch around his neck. Fine. However, if the child was not alive, well, then you'd be putter, like Reb Shimon says, that davar shmelachto is putter. We talked about a basket filled with truma tmeya and truma tahora. So Rav Chizda said, well, if it's the tzorech gufo, that you just want to eat the contents, so then it depends. If the truma tmeya is on top, well, then you can carry it and over to the table and spread it out on the table and take the truma tahora. But if the truma tahora is on top, well, then just take what you want and bring it to the table without having to move the basket with the truma tmeya at all. And if it's a tzorech makomo, that it's just the basket's pasha in a bad place, well, then you can move the basket regardless if whether or not the truma tahora or tmeya is on top or bottom. And we talked about this Medooma stuff, exciting stuff, when you have truma that falls into chulin. Rabbi Yehuda said that you can, if you have one sa'ah of truma that falls into 100 sa'ah of chulin, you'd be allowed to take one sa'ah and give it to the kohen even on Shabbos, so you can eat the chulin. The question is, why? Isn't that fixing the chulin? So first we wanted to say that it's like Rabbi Eliezer, who argues that when you have one part of one sa'ah of truma that falls into 60 sa'ah of chulin, and then it falls into other chulin, so we treat it as if the sa'ah of truma remains intact, and therefore we want to say the same thing over here, that it's as if the sa'ah of truma that fell into the 100 sa'ah of chulin remains intact, and you're not actually fixing a mixture, you're just taking a sa'ah of truma and giving it to the kohen. We said that, yeah, but Rabbi Eliezer goes l'chumra. We don't know that he would say the same thing l'hakel, to be lenient. Then we had Reb Shimon, who says that when you have one sa'ah of truma that falls into 100 sa'ah of chulin, and then another sa'ah of truma falls into the 100 sa'ah of chulin, Reb Shimon says it's okay. We don't treat it as like Medooma, that it's all like truma and you have to give it to the kohen. Rather, we say you could still separate out the sa'ah and give that to the kohen and keep the rest of the chulin, and we want to say that that's for, because he considers the truma to remain separate, and therefore it was always 100 sa'ah of chulin, and that therefore Rabbi Yehuda would say like him, and that's why you're allowed to separate the one sa'ah and give it to the kohen on Shabbos. We say no, that's because according to Rabbi Shimon, as each sa'ah falls in, it becomes batel to all the rest of the chulin, and therefore it's all just one big mixture in which there's truma that is batel in there. But you could still just separate what we need to and give it to the kohen, but it would be a mixture and would be considered fixing it on Shabbos. We then tried to say that it was Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who says that you can already eat it, just kind of look at the part that you want to give to the kohen after Shabbos, and you can already start eating it now. So we see it's clearly not masakin because it's already fine the way it is. So we say, yeah, but Rabbi Yehuda actually argues on Reb Shimon ben Elazar, because we see that they argue in a brayso. So rather, Rabbi Yehuda has his own opinion is on his own, that you could remove, that you can separate, that you could take that one sa'ah, give it to the kohen, and that is fine. We talked about stone on a barrel. We said that, well, if you forgot it there before Shabbos, well, then you can just tilt the barrel and the stone will fall off, and then you can take the wine out of the barrel. But if you intentionally put it there, well, then it'll be a basis of davar also, and you won't be able to tilt the barrel. We then got into this stickle confusing thing, trying to argue that something was Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, but the logic was certainly not clear, as was the maskana. At the end, we talked about what if you have muksa. So then we had a whole bunch of opinions that you can just take a loaf of bread or a baby and put it on the muksa and then move that on Shabbos. But then Mar Zutra then said that that's only if you forgot the item there, not if you put it intentionally. Or Ashi then said it's only for a mace bichlal. And I think that's how we pass in Lamaisa Friends, that was Daf Kuf Mem Beis. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great day. Peace.